see how this goes. Well, last week, we're continuing our sermon series of the 10 enhancements. These are the signs of maturation that move us from our baseline of the 10 commandments and help us to measure and reflect on how we are doing as we grow spiritually. Well, last week, a small catastrophe happened in my son's family with my 2 granddaughters. It began with the wonderful addition of a young cat into the ecosystem of their family. The cat's name is Sneakers, and he is a bit of a sneaker. Most cats are. So the cat happened to sneak around enough to discover the hamster, Carrot Cake. My granddaughter Lily has this hamster in her bedroom, and the hamster minds its business, but Sneakers did not mind his. The cat snuck in and disaster ensued. The upshot was that Carrot Cake disappeared. We're not sure into stomach or what, we wondered. It was not good. Sneakers didn't talk. So suffering happened in this little ecosystem. It was small scale, hamster-size suffering, the child-size suffering of my granddaughter. But you know, that's hard to lose her little Carrot Cake hamster. And Mom and Dad felt some remorse for the situation too, of course. It was suffering. Pint-sized perhaps, but nevertheless, real and authentic suffering. We all face a choice when we suffer. We can harden our souls and protect ourselves, or we can decide, as Ronald Rolheiser recommends in his book, The Sacred Flame, to allow suffering to soften our hearts instead of hardening our souls. Letting our suffering soften us is a decision and a choice. That farmer in the story Jesus told, he hardened his soul and protected himself. We don't know if this farmer had lost all his crops in a previous season. We really don't know the backstory at all. But we know that he had a good harvest, and afterwards he decides that the solution to all that abundance is to build bigger barns, add some storage silos, keep the abundance for himself. Store it all up for a rainy day. It's a perfect defense against future suffering. His decision to do that causes him, unfortunately, to suffer in a different way. The only person after he's done this that he has to talk to is himself. He says to himself, "Now I can rest, eat, drink, and be merry." There's no one else to even talk to about it. And God calls him a fool. Jesus makes it abundantly clear that hoarding and greed, the natural products of catastrophe, are antithetical to living the life God intends. And today in America, we are encouraged to store up, to be like the farmer in Jesus' story, to build bigger barns. We are fools if we don't have retirement accounts, if we don't have insurance, if we don't have our go bag when the crisis hits. We don't have generators. The list of stuff that we need to have in the time of suffering is tremendous. And let's admit, if we were in Georgia or Tennessee or North Carolina right now recovering from Hurricane Helene, we'd be grateful that we had that stuff. It would soften the hardship of our recovery, but it wouldn't be enough. Psychology, ecology, and spirituality tell us that the best way to survive suffering is in community, sharing our resources, telling our stories of trauma, and restoring what was broken together. These are the ways we redeem the world and heal the wounds. We all live in our little ecosystems. We all live under one roof with somebody or some critter or something that brings us life and that we share in that life with. It might be a pet, it might be like us. We had a cockroach this week. You just don't always know who's going to be under your roof on a given day. You might have a hamster and a cat. You have an ecosystem where you work and where you go to school, where you shop and where you play. And all of these places, you belong, and so do the people around you. And the point of our suffering is to help us be softened towards others, and their suffering belongs to us as well. As St. Paul wrote in his letter to the Romans almost 2,000 years ago, the whole creation has been groaning together as it suffers. If suffering is a part of the whole creation, then how do we respond to that? Not just our personal suffering, but the massiveness of the suffering we see around us. We are so puny compared to the massiveness of climate change, compared to ecological disaster and species extinction. Even our hamsters are hard to protect, let alone our water and our air. And this is where the choice comes. Here is where spiritual maturity invites us to go. We are invited to become a part of the redemption of the world. As Romans 8 puts it, we ourselves are groaning for redemption. We are all longing to be freed from suffering, but we can't escape it. For now, at least, suffering is our reality. Doug. We are all freed. Someday we will be freed from suffering, but for now we can't escape it. For now, suffering is real. So how do we cope? Even better, how do we find meaning in the midst of it? Do you want me to grab Doug? Hey, could you grab Doug, Wes? How do we escape from the sense of isolation that comes with suffering? And even better, how do we find meaning in the midst of it? We are invited to do two things, okay? Two things as we deal with suffering. Feel it and focus outward. Feel it and focus outward. Whatever it is we feel, we allow it. We name it. We don't drink it away or binge Instagram or Netflix. We feel our helplessness. We cry and we groan and we share it with a friend, because suffering is scary and it's unpredictable and uncontrollable, like a hurricane, like an unexpected diagnosis. And we might feel helpless or frozen inside and not know what to do, and that's okay. We feel it. It reminds us that we aren't God and that we need each other. The tree depends on the sun for food, the wild goose relies on the wind for flight, and we ourselves rely on each other in our dependence and vulnerability. That is beautiful. It is isolation that is devastating. Feeling helpless keeps our hearts soft, and it helps us focus on redemption. So we feel, and then we focus outward. What is before us that we can do? What can we do for others? How can we speak and pray so that we put aside our own concerns and encourage others? On the news this week, there was a woman living in Asheville, North Carolina, that was featured. You might have seen it. They interviewed her, and like all the people around her, her hardships right now are so significant. No water, no cell service, no electricity, nights in utter darkness, but she was focused on others. They showed her walking over to the trailer of her elderly neighbor, talking with her, bringing her water, hugging this frail woman as she cried. It was beautiful. It was meaningful. It was so redemptive in the midst of that devastation all around us, the tree on somebody's trailer, the whole bit. This is the work of being fully human. When the catastrophe strikes, it's not about me and it's not about mine. It's about us and ours. And how do we work cooperatively so that we bring redemption? Everything about creation is interdependent and restorative. Yes, catastrophes happen, but after the storm comes the rebuilding. After the storm comes the rainbow. After the broken foot comes the healing. After the empty chrysalis of the butterfly that has escaped, the chrysalis returns to feed the earth. Redemption is a part of the fabric of creation. And this is a sign of spiritual maturity, feeling that reality, but focusing outward, groaning from the suffering, just as Romans 8 mentions, but also standing in the hope of glory. So how are we doing with this? Are we seeking ways to restore that which is broken, to mend the suffering? Sometimes the focus of that is as small as a little hamster. My son and daughter-in-law searched everywhere for carrot cake, the little hamster. They put food out in various places and dusted the floor around it with flour. And guess what? Carrot cake showed back up. Woo! Victories, a little injured but alive. And they searched and they focused and they found carrot cake, and there was much rejoicing. Woo! This is the heart of God for us, that we open ourselves to the suffering around us and feel the pain, but focus on love and healing and restoration and encouragement. The wonder of it all is that God is doing the very same thing for us. That God entered the world and walked among us and continues to abide with us, showing what unconditional love looks like. Jesus modeled love by counting everybody in. Nobody is lost. Searching and seeking and welcoming the stranger and the sinner and loving and forgiving even those who murdered him. During horrific suffering, Jesus forgave. He refused to allow pain and hatred to have the last word, and rather than harden his soul, he softened his heart. As a result, redemption flooded into the world. So forceful was the flood of love that gushed through the wounded heart of God that Jesus' dead body was restored to life. On the third day, life reclaimed Jesus, and now it claims us through the power of love. We share that life with others. So may we be partners in love. May we, when we suffer, soften. Thanks be to God that no matter how hard it becomes, we are never alone. We belong to one another. Our purpose remains, and someday all will be redeemed and restored. As St. Paul sat in a prison cell, penning the words of Romans 8, he wrote this: "The sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared to the glory that will be revealed in us." In the end, suffering will pass, and in its place, glory, wholeness, life in all its wonder, continuing forever. Feel it, focus on it. All will be restored someday. And for now, we press on.